Mucus-free.
What's going on, brothers and sisters? This is Professor Spira, and welcome to episode number 15 of the Mucus-free Life podcast. What is going on, family? It is, well, I would say it's getting crazy out there, but for us, there's folks have been practicing the Mucusless Diet Healing System. Honestly, not a whole heck of a lot has changed. We've maintained the same energy, had the same opinion. What's happening now is the opinions and awareness and the fear, consciousness, all these things around us is changing. And in some ways it's for the better, or for some people it's for the better. For other people, you could look at it as potentially not being for the better. But everything is changing, whether you like it or not, you think it should or not. People are starting to see that the type of power that governments wield is a real thing, and it can affect your life. And so if you want to be a pacifist and try to just say these things don't affect me, all I have to do is just think positive thoughts and love and happiness and, you know, fruits, berries, and love, and everything in the world will work itself out, then okay. I mean, you can live in that world if you like, and I understand that kind of thing. But to me, when you're talking about survival, there's a level of engagement that needs to be done. You know, when you're talking about righteousness and doing whatever you can to change the world for yourself, change the world for your loved ones, for your descendants, it is important that we take advantage of the moment. You know, this is a moment in time that gives us an opportunity to elevate our physiologies, elevate our bloodlines, elevate our consciousness, elevate our spirits. You know, it's the character is developed through the turmoil, through the challenges. One thing that I notice in especially in, I don't know, in certain elements of society, the elements of society that are sometimes criticized as being plastic or fake, or, you know, it's like easily consumable for a lot of people that don't want to think. It's, you know, very status quo driven kinds of things. And when you look at that, and it's about escapism and trying to forget and ignore. My thing is to face things head on, the challenges, the ugliness, the beauty. As elevated spiritual beings on this planet, we should be able to take it all in, process it all, and remain human, not let it fold us. And I was listening to this video of these stoicism, these stoic principles, and I agree a lot with some of what I was listening to, what I was hearing, because it's having this attitude about life that's kind of, you know, it's like being hardcore about love, you know, about the not being soft. You know, I just see in some of the circles that tend to be interested in what we're talking about, the natural health areas, sometimes there's a softness, and we don't have the luxury of being able to be like, you know, be too soft in this society, in these societies, in this current world. And the problem is, and I'll get criticism from these folks because they don't want to, they would rather ignore the realities of and the ugliness of certain elements of society and the world, and try to focus only on the positive, only on, good thoughts and that. Like I said, in my opinion, if you truly want to be elevated spiritually, then you will allow yourself to be exposed to all of the elements that are real of society, and I'm not talking about just the fake things that are created for entertainment, but really be exposed to what's really going on. And you can do this through studying history, through knowing how to study the news and being aware of what's happening in the world. And this kind of thing really is an art in itself, I think, because a lot of people can get overwhelmed. And I'm saying that this becomes a spiritual practice to be able, and I'm and somebody that used to get a lot of publicity some years ago. A lot of folks were into David Hawkins and power versus force and that kind of stuff, and he comes out of the Sedona method concepts and practices. He was big into that in the 80s. There's videos of him talking about that from a while ago. But what is interesting that he talked about, which I agree with and I practice, is if you understand these releasing techniques, and I got a video on the Sedona method, and it's just sort of a testimonial. I used it in conjunction with practicing the Mucusless diet to take my practice of the Mucusless diet to a whole different level. There's other methods, there's other things that's in that realm. And it's one of those topics that some people say is controversial within the context of the Mucusless diet because of a few things that Eric said about mental healing and faith healing and that kind of stuff. I think it's not related because Eric was talking about Christian Science for the most part, the field of psychology and talk therapy and releasing of emotions and all those kind of concepts were not around at all yet. And so I think that in that realm, that is a space where there is a lot of things that can be contributed to and brought into the practice of the Mucusless diet. But at the same time, I recommend what I've did, uses Sedona method techniques, but there's a lot of different things out there that you can get into. Brother Air, he talks a lot about the science of breath he practiced. Now I just got done doing some breath work a little while ago, but there's a lot of different breath work things out there to study. He got into the Yogi Ramanyaka book, and of course I've read that book and take little bit. I kind of take little bits and pieces of when it comes to science of breath, just things that I've learned over the years, and kind of develop my own breath work processes. But at the end of the day, my whole the original point, back to just the building of one's character. This is the time when we get to see who people really are, your true colors. And it's fascinating, even on social media, see some people that you thought were so hardcore or so intense are some of the people that express the most fear right now. And so when things get real, when it's just not about talking, when it gets real, you get to see who's ready and who's not, who took the time to prepare themselves, to educate themselves, and who's behind, who hasn't done that yet, who's taking the time to get into their physiology. The title of this is Now More Than Ever. This is the time to dig into and get deep into the practice of the Mucusless Diet Healing System. Now more than ever. Now, of course, for us, like we said, we just stay consistent. Those of us that's been practicing this for years, it's about consistency. It's not about trying to rush and achieve some kind of concept that you have in your head about how advanced you should be based on what? Based on what people said they did in YouTube or something like that. We recommend and encourage people get into and study the book. This becomes a personal journey and experience for you, a path for you. So we can help you find the information and places to get the information, think about these things calmly and objectively, the actual practice, some techniques, concepts, all that kind of stuff. We share a lot of those things. I mean, there's hundreds of hours of, in fact, thousands of hours of material on the YouTube channel and all kinds of information that we've put out over the years. But none of that stuff means anything if you don't do anything. If you don't practice the Mucusless Diet Healing System, just knowing it and having the information in your back pocket. Some people read the Mucusless Diet book and they'll kind of just put it on the back burner. They put the information in the back pocket and say, in case of emergency, break glass and grab, and so times like this, all of a sudden now you're reading the Mucusless Diet book, and I invite you to do that, of course, but things are going to change, and as Brother Air said, you shouldn't want to go back to the way things were, because that's kind of that inclination for a lot of people. It's like, okay, I hope that just want to get things back to normal. What's normal? Normal is a pus and mucus based situation. This concept of normal is not real. It's problematic. Normal within what context? We have to go on that hero's journey at this point. You study Joseph Campbell, the archetypical hero's journey. This is the part of the story where something forces us to leave our comfort zone. Something forces us to go on this grand journey that's going to have ups and downs. It's going to be things that's scary. There's going to be things that are incredibly enlightening and enriching and fun. And when you go on the journey and you give yourself to the journey, and I'm talking about the journey of the Mucusless Diet Healing System. I mean, there is no other journey that's more profound. When you give yourself to that and you're going down that path, it is, it's a remarkable experience. And some people elect to go down that path, and sometimes forces push people and direct people a little bit more firmly to go down that path and point at, like, here, this is the direction you're supposed to go. And right now, the earth is screaming that at us. It's like, look, this is the direction that you go. One thing that I experienced yesterday, I was out on a walk last night in a park that's nearby. And to get to the park, I have to walk next to a expressway. And normally, because of all of the vehicles that are driving up and down that expressway, it's usually really smoggy, and I'm just real sensitive to the exhaust and smells and all this kind of stuff. And I could tell how much better the air is right now. I mean, I love it when I walk outside, and I can tell just breathing the air right now has improved because people are driving less. And if you've seen any of the images that people have shared on social media or just articles, there was somebody had shown how the pollution has transformed overnight in some places, especially China and other places where when they were forced to not drive and forced to shelter in places, they say, all of a sudden, I mean, this is benefiting the earth like insane, like crazy. So those are the kinds of things sometimes you want to think about. It's not always about you. So yes, we're dealing with potential totalitarian dictatorship things and forced vaccination. You know, we have our worries and the things that we're into, but the earth is super happy right now. I mean, it just, man, you know, when you're cutting emissions and the level of pollution is going down as much as we did, I mean, unprecedented in history, in recent history, to have that few people in the world driving around and plants closing that would normally be producing and putting all kinds of filth out into the world. You know, all that stuff shut down for a moment. So this is a fast. The earth is fasting right now. And what happens during a fast? The waste is eliminated. And so there's a lot of waste that's being eliminated right now on the earth, and it's getting a chance to cleanse itself. And so those of us that are on the side of the earth, on the side of nature, you know, this can only help us, just speaking from the nature perspective. So I'm looking at things, you know, we're going to have the discussion today be a little different than, you've been focused a lot on some of the elements of the, the totalitarian type of vibe, you know, sort of the human involvement vibe. But if we look at things from a nature vibe, is earth and nature don't care too much about what our little constructed concepts, our little, you know, government ideas, and these little, you know, we're just little, you know, pions playing in the sandbox and stuff. Earth just wants to be able to do what it's supposed to do without the interference of humans. And so those of us that are on the side of nature, and the largest, most impactful way to decide are you on nature's side or not is what you decide to put into your mouth. I mean, that first and foremost, you know, and people will argue about that. They'll say, well, no, you shouldn't drive a vehicle. You should be walking more, or riding a bike, or you should do this or that. You know, you can walk all you want, but if you're still eating dead animal carcasses, and you understand just a little bit about the kind of pollution that puts out into the world, then you'll understand that you could drive in a vehicle 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, but if you're eating fruits and green leafy vegetables, your footprint on the earth is going to still be a lot lighter, still less detrimental than a couple days worth of eating the dead stuff, and the processed stuff, and all of the crap that turns into the cause and effect. And people do not like this point. They don't want to deal with it. It's wisdom as old as time. It's science. It's wisdom. You can call it karma. You can call it cause and effect. You can find some kind of sophisticated physics equations for it if you like, if you want to be into the science side of thinking. But however you look at it, for every action there's a reaction. You eat something that's not supposed to be a part of your experience as a human being, that's not designed for us, there are consequences. And some of the initial consequences, like many addictions, seems good. It's that you eat something and you've been conditioned certain elements in it that stimulate you, get you high. You know, don't taste good. This is salty. This is sweet. This is got caffeine in it. You know, get my little high. It's got alcohol in it. This is whatever it's got in it. We categorize everything as stimulants, even, you know, then we don't get into these are stimulants and these are depressants. And it's like, no, if it's altering your mind and your brain chemistry in these ways, you're talking about a stimulant. The question is it a stimulant that leaves behind a whole bunch of waste and messes in with your brain chemistry in a negative way, or is it something that is a positive? Fruit's a stimulant, but it's a stimulant that you need. It is the quintessential, well, not the quintessential, air would be the the number one, but what choices are you making? We have to, I think, start teaching that. Those of us that, because I know I'm preaching to the choir for a lot of folks that's listening to this podcast, but I think that's a message that we can start really putting out there into the world and be a little bit more aggressive with putting that message out. I think we're at a time now. I didn't recommend that years ago. Years ago I said, okay, it depends on the period for me. So years ago I said, well, right now you really got to focus on getting your physiology together. And that hasn't changed, but there is also an element, as more people become aware of the mucusless diet, as more people start to practice it, a group of people that are doing a quality job of practicing the mucusless diet makes it easier and as a whole to practice it. So now I'm encouraging people to share the diet more because we are ready. The earth is ready. I think humans are ready. We've loosened up the waist already. Over the past 6-7 years, we've been loosening up. This is all about a transition on all levels. So we've been loosening up the waist, and we've had some of the lemon juice and distilled water enemas happening on humanity. And so the fact that you can even talk about veganism now publicly, and you're not looked at like a total outcast to society, that's letting us know things have been loosening up. Because when I started practicing the diet, you just used a term like vegetarian, much less veganism. Just the word vegetarian, people would, you were just immediately outcasted. Now, that's not to say that still doesn't happen in different places, but the fact that you can go into these big stores and the word vegan is all over the place in the store. It's a brand new world, just in the past 15, 17 years. So now it's time to make things more aggressive. See, I know I talk a lot about being gentle with the transition, mainly because there's so many people that are plugging in to our information that need to hear that message because they've been too aggressive. They've tried to skip the transition, eat nothing but fruit, be 100% raw, and they felt good for a while. Then they hit the glass ceiling and they can't, it's getting bad at that point. There's whole groups dedicated to, the ex-vegan and ex-fruitarian groups saying, oh, that stuff is a bunch of malarkey. I had a terrible experience. You didn't transition, period. you just, whether you didn't know about it or you thought you were transitioning, but you weren't really, it's, so that's a problem that I talk about a lot. But once you have more people that really understand how to transition with purpose and with quality, then it does make it easier. And so we're at a point now where I'm saying, let's reach out. Let's put this out there. Let's see who can put this information out and really encourage people to take a look at what we're talking about, what we're practicing, because it is a salvation. It's a salvation of the human species, or I wouldn't be doing it, or talking about it, or would be having that kind of passion to say this is important, the most important thing that we can be dealing with. Because, I know there's so many philosophies out there, the spiritualists, that say, well, that the only thing that's important is your connection to spirit. Well, if that's true, then is it not possible to be more connected to who you are as a spiritual being when you're unobstructed, when your stomach isn't a graveyard for dead carcasses? I mean, wouldn't that make sense that the most spiritually advanced fruit, or food for humans would be fruit, green leafy vegetables, things that don't leave behind that slimy residue. I mean, that makes sense to me. Then there's the mentalists, or I'll call them mentalists, that say it's all the mind. It's all about mindset and psychology, and just keeping how you think about everything is the main thing that's important. I wrote a whole article on that. Is the Mucusless diet and fasting and all these things, is it all just psychological? And my main argument there is it's all transition. Transition is not a choice. Transition is the law. Something that can be observed in all aspects of nature, in all aspects of your life. If it was all just about psychology or just a mindset and the mental, and there was no such thing as transition, and things didn't have to unfold gradually, then a 1-year-old infant or child could use the power of their mind to expedite the process of them growing. So this little 1-year-old could just say, because my mind is so strong, I'm going to rapidly increase my size. I'm going to mature at a quick rate. So I'm going to take 15 to 20 years of growth and do it in the span of a couple weeks, because I have such a strong mind in my little 1-year-old baby body. Now, of course, that's not going to happen. It's and in that context, that's absurd to think that a 1-year-old child could use the power of their mind to speed up the process of growing into an adult. That's not how it works. No matter what, and science would not be able to find a way to make that process go faster and it be and it make any kind of sense. There's no way you could take a 1-year-old or a 2-year-old child and do anything to them, whether it was a mind thing or whatever, and have them become an adult more quickly than the unfolding process allows. You transition into adulthood. You don't become an adult overnight. You transition through phases. In nature, you live in some place that happens to have seasons, and then you can see the changing of the seasons as it's transition. We transition into fall into winter, and winter into spring, spring into summer. Those are transitions. It's a constant transitional process, and we have to really understand it's not just about a diet. And we talk a lot about the transition diet. There's a whole paradigm here that needs to be uncovered and understood to really grasp how heavy and how powerful transition is. And for me, that's the most important, probably the heaviest part, and everybody has a different opinion on that. For me, probably the heaviest part at this point of Mucusless Diet Healing System methodology is the transitional paradigm, the transition methodology. And I like to think that we're contributing to that and taking it to the next step by having these kind of conversations, making these kind of observations, understanding that it's all about transition. And these systems that we've put in place. They are part of the transitional process. You're the result of years and generations of transition. As you look at some of these really complicated systems that humans have created, it's natural for us, I believe, to create systems. We're made up of systems. We create systems around us to live the way that we want to live. We are, by nature, we are system creators. And these systems have evolved over time, and they get more and more refined. And that's a natural part of the human experience. But we have to see that. We have to, so say all that just because we have to get that idea out of our head that there's some other way to do this, that there's some other way that we can, there's a faster way you can, I mean, I get those questions almost at least once or twice a week. I see some question of people wanting to skip over the transition. I mean, any question that has anything to do with, well, what if I did this? What if I did if I use the bentonite clay? Will that speed things up? Or if I use enough herbs, or do some of Dr. Morris's methods, or if I take these Dr. Sebi things over here, or if I do this, can it go faster? Can I get to this level quicker? And those are not the questions, in my opinion, that we should be asking. It's not representative of the levels of thought of where we should be at. Instead of asking those kind of questions, I'd love to get more questions about transitional technique, because I get excited about the technique of the exploration of different food items, and say, okay, well, what if I'm eating this right now? What if I try this other thing? Or, right now, I'm doing my enema first thing in the morning. What happened if I do the enema before I go to bed? It's like there's these little tweaks that we can make to our day that have huge transitional implications. And those are the questions that I would like to see more of. I'm not these questions about, well, if I do this, what if I fast every week for the next year? Do you think that I can become 100% mucusless after that? We gotta put the intensity in the right place. That's what I see, that intensity and focus are on the wrong things oftentimes. So, and sometimes I think the intensity that people like me and Brother Air bring to the table when we're talking about the Mucusless diet is misunderstood and misinterpreted. And so we'll come to the table and we have the energy and we're saying, hey, look, man, you need to get into this immediately. Come on, Mucusless Diet Healing System, get into this. And some people will interpret that energy as, once you get into it, now you got to hurry up. You got to hurry up and transition fast and rush and if you listen to us long enough, that's not the message. And now with me, I admit that I tend to I'm not as gentle of a transitioner when it comes to the mental part of it. And I understand some people need a more gentle transition when it comes to the unfolding of this information, the consciousness that comes with it. And I know I'm not the best for that, because when it comes to the mental side of it and being able to it's almost like sometimes with the mental, I almost want to use the technique of bring about a fall and then you put it back together. Because for some people, when you're studying and just studying history, and I'm not talking about studying philosophy, just studying real history and looking at some of the terrible things that happened, but at the same time looking at some of the great things that have happened. like I said, to me, it's important to be able to take it all in. But these kind of concepts, I don't have too much of a transition, when it comes to dealing with things like the protein theory and the calorie theory and the my patience and transition is less in there because I'm just saying, well, like, look, that's work that you got to do. I don't believe in those theories. Go check out the history of those theories and see if you agree with it. And so I'm like, that's something you need to do today. Just get that over with. If you're gonna rush into something and skip over a transition, do it there. We don't have time to be trying to spend a whole lot of time dealing with these, like, well, is the calories real? Or, like I said, take your time in terms of studying it. Go check out those philosophies or whatever, and all, Atwater and, get into that stuff. But for me, we don't have a whole lot of time there. But when it comes to what you decide to put into your body, what you decide to flush out of your body, that's where each person's situation is different. Everybody's body is different. But that's where I encourage you to be gentle with yourself, be loving with yourself. Don't be hard on yourself. So that's where my gentle, but that's where people want to be the hardest. For some reason, it's like the opposite. Like, people with the mental stuff, they want that to be soft. They like, oh, Professor Spira, that energy, those thoughts, that's a little too much. That just be more gentle. It's all about love, fruits and berries and love and hugs. And I'm like, man, when the mental time, I'm saying that's cultivate that. Be hardcore there. That's that warrior mindset. We need that there to confront all of the past and be ready for what's coming at us in the future. The soft thing is done. I'm that's over. Now, I mean, after this, what this is bringing out for me and what this signals for me is that sort of soft mentality is, the days of that are over. We don't need that anymore. We need to be cultivating hardcore mentality when it comes to being ready to deal with whatever is coming our way, and to be able to protect. I mean, we have to protect our practice of the Mucusless diet. We have to protect our way of life, and in order to, before you can do that, you gotta have some level of a strong mindset. And like I've talked about before, a lot of you didn't sign up to be revolutionaries. You haven't studied that. You don't know what it is to be a revolutionary. You never wanted that. But here you are practicing the most revolutionary lifestyle on the planet. And so we sometimes find ourselves in situations where that we didn't plan, and that's part of the journey, and that's what I like about it. That's the fun part for me. That's the journey. And we find ourselves here, and there's things that we didn't sign up for. I mean, believe me, I never thought, if you'd have told me back in the year 2000 and 2001 that I would be talking about diet and health, and people would be healing themselves based on things that I've been saying and materials that I put out, I would just look at you like, what are you talking about? Because that was not, I didn't have that vision of that. I was chosen and called to do a job, to contribute something, and things that only the things that I'd been gifted that, I could choose to share or not to share. But I was encouraged to share. And so I answered the call. But my initial vision was to go and be a famous musician and become one of the greatest musicians in the world and all that kind of stuff. That was, so if you would have told me that I would be on tour, on stage with whoever, If you'd have told me that, I'd been like, well, yeah, that's the plan. That's the direction we're going in. But Mucusless Diet totally changed that for me, where that was not the important thing. It changed my values. So being a famous musician just for the sake of fame and fortune was no longer important and interesting. Getting myself together physiologically, trying to clean my blood up. And once that clicked in and I understood the power of this work that we do on ourselves, that was like, okay, this is the way I'm going. And the music is gonna come, and the contribution in terms of music, because that has been a big part of my practice. And when you start to understand the artistry and how art and understanding art, the art appreciation, the practice of art making, when you understand that from that perspective, you can really enhance your practice and understanding the Mucusless Diet Healing System. And so that's one of these things I talk about that I never hear too many other people talk about, because one, if you got to identify yourself as an artist and really work on your craft on these high levels, and that can train you on how to understand the process of the transition, because all great artists understand the transition, just in theory, because you can't, there are some people that are endowed with some great abilities and talent, but they still practiced hours and hours a day, or they worked on whatever it was they were doing. They worked on it, or they did it a lot. They continued to do it. So there was a transitional process involved where their art had to unfold over time, and over time they gained more control over it. They got they got better at what they were doing, because there's a process involved. But the process must be understood first and foremost to be a transitional process. And so, in other words, transition. Transition. And if you are somebody that has a little bit more of a, when I say soft, and I'm not saying that in a way, kind of sort of a soft mentality or that kind of thing. I'm not attacking you or saying that in a way to make you feel bad or anything like that. I'm just saying I'm offering you an opportunity to level up, as some of the young folks will say now and then. It's time to level up, and so for me, this fascinated me. I asked this question in one of our meetups a while back, where I said, okay, well, what figures inspire you? If I was to, and I had to say, but people wanted to say me and Brother Air. I'm like, no, besides us, I'm talking about historical figures, or maybe family members, or who is it that inspires you when you need inspiration, when you're going through something hard and you need to plug into some energy to help you keep, to remind you who you are and keep that reason going. Who is that for you? And I was surprised that some people really didn't, they couldn't think of somebody. They didn't have, and I have even have a friend that really doesn't think like that, doesn't plug into, the figures in that way but I encourage it, and I find, most of my inspiration, a great deal of my inspiration from the ancestors and different historical figures, that I've studied the lives of over the years, and really, draw on their energy. I kind of tune into their frequency, and that's, to be more metaphysical about it. When you study these figures, or you invoke the strength of some of the strongest people in the history, and I'm talking about strong character, strong, you're not physically strong. When you invoke them, and meditate on them, and you can plug in. You can plug into that energy, that energy field. And, if you permit me to get a bit metaphysical, generally I like to keep things more, kind of straightforward, a little more scientific and objective, but that's a real thing. And we haven't really been able to, in terms of science, be able to really explain that. And even just inspiration. That's why a lot of the field of self-help and a lot of the motivation and those things are sort of considered charisma, and all these concepts are sort of pseudoscientific, or they're just sort of in this field because there's not really a way to quantify it. It's not a scientific. It's an art. A lot of this stuff. But when you start bringing in this idea of plugging in to other people, the energy of other people, the energy of ancestors, now you're starting to get over into that world of understanding frequencies and energies that kind of go beyond the scientific norms. But for me, and my example of that is Harriet Tubman. So if you don't know who Harriet Tubman is, please look her up. Watch a couple documentaries on her. There's a few of them that's out there. But Harriet Tubman, who saved the lives of many slaves by risking her own freedom. She emancipated herself and continued to go back and put herself in harm's way and in danger with some of the worst humans that this planet has ever seen. The scum of the earth had dogs running after her, and and the things that they would have done to her if they got a hold of her are unspeakable. Yet that did not deter her. She continued to go to enemy territory and save her brothers and sisters by leading them to a freedom, leading them to a place where they would be safer than where they were, where they would not be in bondage. The Moses of her people, as she was sometimes called, Harriet Tubman. So when I'm having a bad day, or I think, I'm woe is me, I'm feeling sorry for myself, which I do, like we all do. When I'm going through that, I start thinking about Harriet Tubman, and that gets me into shape, where it works for me. Because that kind of courage, if I could, in my lifetime, if I can show or just exemplify 5% of that kind of courage, I would be happy. I'd be pleased, because we don't see that kind of courage, that level. Man, I'm just in awe of what she did. And there's others, so of course, obviously, Professor Arnold Ehret, I'm plugging into him constantly. That's just that one's so close that I don't even think about that as much. I've plugged into that in a kind of a different way. But I'm just to say, you don't have to plug into. It doesn't have to necessarily be historical figures. Some people might have some elders in their family, grandparents, or just somebody that's just has a very strong character, these fearless kind of people, that are so loving, yet they are they don't suffer fools, they don't play games, there's a hardcore. So that's what I'm talking about when I'm talking about that hardcore, and getting away from that soft kind of character and that soft kind of like, whiny-ism, that all like, they're making us stay in our house, and and then all the toilet paper's gone, and I'm scared, like. And again, if you're coming from that, this isn't meant to make fun. This is meant to pump you up and say, like, we got to be beyond that. We got to get to that warrior mentality. And that has nothing to do with aggression. It has to do with power, real power. We talked about David Hawkins earlier, the book Power versus Force. I look at that just sort of just a modern New Age philosophical treatise. A lot of these kind of works, but it's a modern philosophy. But that understanding that, it's about being powerful, but real power. Real power doesn't have anything to do with being able to knock somebody out, or this whole, force. That's force crap. That don't have nothing to do with real power, real integrity. Harriet Tubman, that's real power. That's real integrity. And if you plug into that vibe and you are trying to, it's like if you're trying to achieve that, I mean, there's a lot of, when I see a lot of young people, they're plugging into these pop icons, and they want to be like, I want to be like Beyonce. I want to be like, I'm like, we got to, as older folks and elders and educators, we got to do a better job of really educating the young folks and exposing them to these figures and doing it in a way that is intense, that isn't boring. Because I've been in them classes too, where some of these history, social studies type of classes where the teacher doesn't even really want to be there. They're bored of what they're talking about because they haven't plugged into anything. And I'll never forget, I had a teacher, social studies teacher, where overall, I mean, I got along with him and stuff, but it got to where they had in our textbook had a picture of Marcus Garvey, and they had sort of like a paragraph about Marcus Garvey in there and what he had did. And the teacher, just the attitude that they had about when he was talking about Marcus Garvey and what he was trying to do and accomplish, it was so dismissive. And at that point, I hadn't studied him. I was being exposed to him for the first time. So for a lot of other people, they would have just taken that, and to this day, a perception would be colored by having a teacher that just dismissed this historical figure. Whereas I knew something was wrong with that. Even then, I'm like, wait a minute, this one of the only black dudes in this period that we talking about, in this little period right here. You got they're like, okay, here's Booker T. Washington, W.E. Du Bois, and then, and around that same type of discussion, here's this guy named Marcus Garvey. It's like, well, why is this teacher dismissing? Because the text didn't dismiss him. It didn't say this dude was a bad guy or anything. So why is this teacher dismissing this guy? So I had to investigate that. Later in life, it wasn't that much. When I think about it, it wasn't that much later because I was a junior in high school when this class I'm thinking of. I was a junior. Then a couple years later is when I really started studying history seriously, on my own outside of the academic context, where I was getting into. I read there was a book, the Marcus Garvey Reader. I read that years ago. It was just a bunch of different writings, either on that Garvey had wrote, and I think there was probably a couple articles in there from other people, but that was interesting. So I got a chance to really see, like, okay, there is some problems with the way that these figures are taught. So my point basically is that just these figures that we could be plugging into, young people are missing out on the opportunity to really be properly exposed to them. Because if there's a teacher that's bored, that's talking about these figures in sort of a way like, let's just get this over with, yeah, Marcus Garvey, yeah, Harriet Tubman, yeah. If that's the attitude, and the kids, they're not gonna be taught how to even plug in. That's what in fact, that's an interesting point, that if you're an educator, and a way to think about educators, you're talking about a history teacher, their job is to plug you in and teach you how to plug in to many of these figures, these important historical figures, and understand them, because there's sort of good, bad, and ugly, and some of that is up to one's discretion and their own ethical outlook on things. But some figures is important to plug into and maintain that legacy. And but that's, like I said, that's me. Just, yeah, anytime. And it happens, where you start doubting, and that's part of the hero's journey. If we go back to the Joseph Campbell, so when we talk about hardcore outlook in mentality, part of that is not that nothing affects you, it's that you are able to work through it. That whatever comes your way, you work through the madness. You work through the pain, and you are able to survive and get to the other side, and that builds character. When you get to the other side of that, man, you're transformed. And that's what the Mucusless Diet Healing System does. You get to the other side of that thing, and you are transformed, body, mind, and spirit, in ways that you didn't think you would be, in ways you didn't sign up for. But it is what it is. And so that is my message on that. Like I said, today is more important than ever. Practice the Mucusless Diet Healing System and go on this journey. I invite you. You are cordially invited to go on this journey of physiological exploration, transformation, elevation. It is an experience that you have to give yourself to. You have to be open. Can't be trying to control everything with it. That's one problem. People try to control things that they don't have control over. You don't have control over how long your transition is going to be. That's a waste of time and energy to even try to think that you can control that kind of thing. That's not the kind of stuff you can control. I'm inviting you to control your mindset, control the things that you consume, the things that you think about, and be trying to plug into and pointing your frequency to the higher things of higher vibration. But you got to transition to that. There's a number of people that talk like that say, you just have to tune in to the higher vibration and things that are of higher vibration. Problem with that is it sounds nice, but you got to transition into that. You think you all of a sudden overnight you're going from where you're watching movies that are dead, all about murder and death and destruction, and playing video games where you can have sex with a prostitute and then kill her, and Grand Theft Auto and Doom, running around killing all these zombies. You think you can go from the depths of a death culture like that, and just overnight just have nice thoughts of springtime and kittens and spirituality. It's just all so calm, and put a nice little tree over here, and happy little tree. It's like, you got to transition into that. If that's what you think spirituality is about, or what you think the direction is, for me, peace comes in a lot of different facets. So peace isn't necessarily what you think it is in terms of this energy, because you can be peaceful in all kinds of different ways, in all kinds of circumstances. And so to me, peace is the goal ultimately. But that's a heavy Man, that's a whole other, it's like a whole episode in itself. Just like, let's explore peace. What is that? What is peace? Peace versus chaos. Learning how to, because that's an art. There's an art to that. There's a transition to that. Learning how to change your frequency. You know, I've heard it described as kind of like in the way that you would change the radio frequency, if people that still remember how radios work. But you change the number, and depending on the number, once you plug into the frequency, you hear what's on that channel. You know, if it's, 88.9 is a channel that you're trying to plug into, and you go there and you're plugging in. Now, if your antenna is obstructed, if there's some kind of obstruction involved, then you get static, or you can't hear it, or there's some kind of don't sound right. So vitality equals power minus obstruction is still at work at all times. It's all about that. So, but what are you trying to plug into? What frequency do you want to plug into? So when you're talking about the spiritual realm, you're and learning how to plug into things of higher vibration. There's an art to that. There's a transition to that. And you hear us talking about jazz all the time, and we find that, jazz music is an art form. The music that's coming out, that's some of the highest vibrations that you're going to get in terms of what humans can produce. But for a lot of people, it's hard for them to, they don't understand it. It's hard for them, just instrumental music in general. It's a high vibration. It's hard for a lot of people to get into that, but we invite you and encourage you to get into that, get into these things, start transitioning yourself into and doing that work to get into things of higher vibration, art, different form. I used to enjoy this program, which I don't know if it's still how long it was on, or how, I know there's some seasons that I missed, but there was this, I think it was called Art 21 or something like that. But they followed all of these different modern artists in their lives and talking. That was just fascinating. Some of these folks, their vibration, they're super vibrating on all kinds of different levels. So it's nice to be exposed to that and to plug into what you can. What makes sense for you to plug into. But that, the frequency concept, I would recommend to read something like Power versus Force, David Hawking, and I already talked about Sedona method. But as those are processes of actually things that you can actually do, systems that you can apply that can raise your energy level and your vibration. And as you raise, you're able to plug in to higher and higher vibrations. But the foundation of that is Mucusless Diet Healing System. I just have to, it should go without being said, but I got to say it for the people that aren't getting it yet. The first and foremost, you got to start cleaning yourself up, and you get yourself clean enough where you can get into fasting and that kind of stuff. You will be able to experience these higher frequencies, and as you experience them, you feel better. You're moving away from chaos. See, a lot of people are addicted to chaos, and my definition, which I won't get into, sort of this is a whole philosophical area that I'd studied, but I do like this particular definition of chaos, which means unnecessary process. Chaos being things that do not have to happen. It's unnecessary. There is a lot of death that takes place on this earth and pain that's unnecessary. And so it sows chaos. There's a lot of terrible behavior that's unnecessary and sows chaos. But there's cause and effect at work here. So if you eating pus and mucus forming foods, or you're a part of that vibration, because what foods are the highest vibrating foods for humans? Fruits, raw fruits and green leafy vegetables. I mean, that's the direction that we want to go in. Like we said, if you haven't transitioned to it, it's that vibration is too high. Then you're not going to be able to sustain it. You have to transform your physiology to be able to maintain and be able to hold on to that high frequency vibration. And the same goes with the mental, spiritual realms. You got to study and practice, find your way to that, your path to that. But I'm just a firm believer of removing chaos from your life, it's okay to be at peace. I mean, in this world, you almost have to let people know it's okay to not have chaos. It's okay to be peaceful. It's okay. You're allowed. You are allowed to be at peace. And as I said before, can you expose yourself to the good, the bad, and the ugly of humanity and be enriched by the experience and maintain your peace? There's not a whole lot of people out here that have done that or have a message that, and I just kind of keep coming back to David Hawkins in this, because he has talked about this, and he's one of the, he's somebody well respected amongst the sort of the new age spiritualists. And so I'm just sort of invoking him a bit here more than I normally do, but he's talked about that because he did some techniques and that's along the lines of things that I had done that he talked about he had did years ago, in where you can use the chaos and use some of these things to elevate and heighten your vibration. If you know how to release, if you know these techniques, some of these things and other systems of emotional release that I've talked about in other spaces, you can watch the news for an hour. And this is something that he talked about, but I had already been practicing this concept. We plugging into a similar wavelength. Instead of trying to run away from it and ignore it, you can turn on the news for an hour. And if you're releasing that whole time, like every time you see something that's disturbing, because when you learn to release, you release everything. So you release the good, the bad, and the ugly emotions. So, you're seeing all this stuff, coronavirus, COVID, these thousands of people died. This happened over here. And if you learn to take that in and then release it, be cognizant of the emotion that brings up, and then you let it go, you can essentially conquer your emotions. You conquer that, so that you get to a point where it's not that you're unfeeling, it's not an ignorance type of thing. You've actually worked through all of the pain and the suffering, the happiness, the love, the hate. You've worked through all of those emotions to get yourself to a point of self-realization or self-actualization, on these concepts that people talk about in various spiritual circles. But you can release yourself to these higher states of consciousness, and while maintaining the peace, being at peace. So I'm just not into that pacifist type of message where there's definitely a number of gurus that talk about just everything is as it is, just ignore the world around you, just go inside and breathe. And now of course I'm saying, yes, go inside and breathe, but at the same time conquer the chaos that's in your world and clean yourself up. And in doing so, you can bring about real peace on the earth. Not fake peace, not verbal peace. Like, oh, I just love love everything and love you, and if we just love, then love will love. No, work through all of it, because it's all part of the human experience. The good, the bad, and the ugly. Work through it. Once you conquer it, then you decide if you want to be exposed, what you want to be exposed to or not. Because like I said before, there's the life of the renunciate. So if you're going to renounce society, there's a whole lot of benefits and things that you can get from walking that path. But most of us are not going to go that path. So I invite you to, if you're going to be here and you're going to participate in the systems of the modern human reality, then use it. Use it to transition. Use it to elevate yourself and become self-actualized. Develop on that level, because we're given this such a great opportunity. And that's, again, I liked how Hawkins thought about that, where all of this chaos in the world and these things that are troubling and scary, we can harness that, use that to essentially conquer fear, be able to better control what you put into your body, better control your frequency, and the vibration that you're plugging into. It elevates everything. And so I invite you to cultivate yourself, cultivate your character, because to me it's fun. It's fun to evolve over time, to strengthen my understanding and learn and study. I enjoy that. And I also enjoy peace and getting deeper and deeper into peace, even in the midst of such chaos. And sometimes people, especially the past couple weeks, I've noticed people tend to project their own fears or their own sadness or whatever onto other people. And in my case, like on making videos, and I'm showing different parts of myself and communicating in ways that, that may be different, a little different than what I've done in the past because of the times, and the topic. You go with the vibration of the times. And my thing is trying to communicate what needs to be communicated in the way that is best going to be received for the largest number of people. And what we're talking about now is a different type of revolution, transformation that needs to happen, and survival mindset. And so there is going to be some more intensity, but some people have misinterpreted my intensity and passion as fear. Or there was somebody on a video that said that why are you so sad? I'm like, well, I'm actually the opposite. I'm one of these people that feel better today than I did 2 or 3 weeks ago. The things that are happening in the world right now is what we have been talking about, and you find out who is being real and who is faking the funk. We're talking about, because we often talk about, we want to put this society in the dustbin of history. We want to create something new. So a lot of people say, oh, that sounds good. Now, when nature starts taking us in that direction, people are starting to rethink that, because it's getting real now. But if you're me, I'm excited. I'm happy, so I'm far from sad. I'm pleased. This is a great opportunity to elevate yourself, elevate the community, come together. And we're going to see what people are made of, because, like I said, these things we've been talking about for years. We've been predicting for years. And it's not meant to fear monger. That's the other thing people been trying to say in some of the comments. You're like, oh, you're fear mongering. You're you're talking about forced sterilization. Well, I'm talking about things that happened. I'm not talking about theoretical agendas that may or may not be happening and things that I can't control, conspiracy kind of concept. Like, I'm talking about things that have the receipts. We can look at the history of forced sterilization. We can look at the history of internment camps. We can look at Holocaust. We can look at slavery. We can look at any number of different things in the past to better understand what is happening to us right now and what can happen to us if we do not act appropriately and we don't come together appropriately with a plan. As Brother Air said, the oppressor they have an outline. Our enemies have outlines, of control, how to best control us in our lives. And if you're a freedom loving person like me, then you agree with Martin Luther King, who said, injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. And so you stand up to evil. You stand up to things that aren't right. And you sometimes have to put yourself out on a limb and on the line to change things and resistance. Like that, this is not okay. What's happening? This is not okay. And there's ways to, and what I'm trying to get us to do is to resist in a sophisticated manner as opposed to an emotional type of manner, which is the reaction that a lot of people get, because they try to draw on their anger or fear, or, all these lower vibrations. They draw on that, then take to the streets. And I'm saying, no, we need to work through those emotions, let them go, as I've been talking about. Now, don't hold on to the anger and the fear, and don't hold on to that, but don't ignore it either. Don't suppress it. Observe it, hold it, then let it go. And then with a clear mind, move into, and from a space of power, put together a plan and come together with other people around you or people in your community and educate each other and come together with a plan of resistance. That's how this has to work. This isn't going to be about lashing out in fear or sadness. This is going to be about resisting from a place of power. The last thing that I want to talk about today in this episode is we're going to talk about the causes of death and how a lot of these coronavirus numbers are not adding up for me. So I put together a list of statistics, death statistics, and if you do the top causes of death in the world or worldwide or something like that in a search engine, the one of the most common studies that comes out was the 2016 death study. And so according to that famous 2016 study, which is what a lot of these lists are based on, to put things into perspective, the number one killer on the planet is cardiovascular disease. 17.6 million people a year die of cardiovascular disease, and it's probably more now. But in 2016, this is the numbers that they came up with. So you do take the numbers with some type of grain of salt, but this is what we have to work with. So cardiovascular disease, 1.4 million people a month that die of cardiovascular disease, and over 48,000 people that die every day of cardiovascular disease. 48,000 people a day die of cardiovascular disease, which is very much preventable. The chronic illnesses related to cardiovascular disease are very much related to improper, unnatural human diet. the dead animal flesh eating, the dairy eating, the grains and starches, over in eating that stuff for decades and decades, ultimately results in that type of death process, that kind of thing. The next is cancers, which is 8.9 million people a year die of cancer, and 744,000 a month, and over 24,000 people a day die from cancers. Then we get to respiratory diseases, 3.5 million a year, and almost 10,000 people a day die from respiratory diseases. Then next on the list, you get diabetes or other blood and endocrine diseases, 3.1 million a year, 8.7 7,000 or 8,700 people a day are considered to be dying from these diseases. Then after that, you have dementia and lower respiratory infections. So, and that's kind of a question: what the difference between respiratory diseases and lower respiratory infections in terms of their particular study. I'd have to read that original study. This is kind of problematic because there's certain things, even if you look up respiratory disease and lower respiratory infections, there are a number of lower respiratory infections that come up as being associated with respiratory disease, and there's also some cancers that are, lung cancer, that is also noted under respiratory disease. So anyway, there's some of these things are a bit questionable, but that leads us to then discussing the novel respiratory infection called COVID-19. And so right now, these numbers do not consider exponentiality, so I understand that. But just based on the numbers that we have, so this was from April 2nd is when I wrote this down. So based on that, there were about 588 people a day that they're saying dying of the COVID-19. And like I said, the fear is related to the potential of exponentiality, the exponent. People start dying in larger and larger numbers. But there's so many problems related to this whole thing, where and I don't have the exact numbers in front of me at the moment, but when I was reading about all the people that are dying, this 600 people a day that are diagnosed with this, that are dying, or after they died, they do a test and say that they died because of complications of this. The majority of these folks are older, as most people know, but more than that, most of them had been diagnosed with up to 3 other diseases, anywhere from cardiovascular disease, cancers. I mean, there's some of these people have already had the top 3, had cardiovascular disease, some kind of cancer. Some of them had blood endocrine issues. And then on top of that, they get this COVID-19, which should be classified under the respiratory disease, or at worst, the lower respiratory infections. If I'm wrong about that, if you can, in the comment section, if you have a better analysis of it, then you can please share with the community. I'm looking at this thing as an outsider to the to those folks that create all these things and definitions and stuff. But as an outsider and someone that I'm not great at math. I didn't do really good in math classes, but I can do these numbers and I can tell they're not adding up. So if 9,698 people a day die from respiratory diseases and 6,520 die of lower respiratory infections, Well, first and foremost, why don't we just put those together? I mean, that I would love somebody to answer me that. Respiratory disease, let's put all that together. Combine lower respiratory infections with the respiratory disease, and that makes the number even greater. In fact, if you combine, you would still be under cancers, but it would make the respiratory disease quite a bit bigger. Now, what if you just added for these people, these 600 people that are dying a day of, they say, complications of COVID-19, wouldn't it make sense to just add that to the number of people that die every day of respiratory disease? We already have almost 10,000 people that die of respiratory disease. Adding another 1,000 to that a day still keeps us well under cancer, which is 24,000 people are dying every day from cancer, and is astronomically below cardiovascular disease, which is 48,000 people a day. Almost 50,000 people a day die from cardiovascular disease, and you tell me which is the epidemic. Which one of these should we be shutting down businesses for? Should we be enacting sweeping legislation for in a rational world? If you are going, and I'm not into that kind of this kind of government intervention anyway, but if you are and you agree with this kind of government telling you that you can't, you're not allowed to be in groups larger than 10 people and you have to shelter at home, and if you're into that and you think that that's perfectly fine for a government to take away your freedom like that, and if, as they claim, that these taking away of freedoms are meant to help us in terms of a health crisis, then wouldn't it make more sense to ban the eating of dead animal flesh? In some places around the world, you can go walking up the street right now and you can be arrested. They're not doing it yet in where I'm at, but legally you can get up to 90 days in jail if the police see you out loitering somewhere and they come and say, "Hey, what you doing?" If you're not shopping or going to the doctor, or if you don't have a job that is considered to be essential, they can arrest you. And this is happening some places in the world. People are being that are resisting the stay-at-home, shelter and house mandate. They are being arrested and they're being quarantined. They're being thrown into these internment type of situations. So if that's okay to do, why would it not be okay to ban slaughterhouses, to ban wet markets, to ban butcher shops? If we're talking about health, if the reason this is happening is to try to prevent an epidemic, we already have an epidemic. 50,000 people a day are dying of cardiovascular disease. 50,000, we have 600 people that they say die of COVID-19 a day. Even if that did blow up exponentially, you would have to blow way, way up to get anywhere near 50,000 people a day that are dying of cardiovascular disease. And whether you want to, if I could go and get into the case studies, there's case studies of the connection between cardiovascular disease and the eating of dead animal flesh, the eating of dairy. Even if you're into that research and you're into that kind of medical science, scientific studies, you can find those. It's pretty clear, and it's not really disputed anymore, the connection between eating dead animal flesh and dairy and cardiovascular disease. Yet we're doing nothing. There's no public will, there's no consciousness to shut down barbecue pits and restaurants that serve the stuff that kills the majority of people on this planet. So I don't want to hear about that this is a good thing, that this is something that we should be doing to stay at home. That's this next thing that they're creating this hysteria and this scarlet letter syndrome where everybody, if you speak against these actions that the government's taking right now, that you are castigated by the society. You're put down. You're saying shame on you. And before you know it, they'll be saying shame on you and throwing you in an internment camp. Or like's happening in, forget the exact country in Africa, where they're caning people and marching people through the town to be made fun of and to make an example of people that aren't following the directions to stay at home. I don't want to hear that. So until you're prepared to make some drastic government type of changes to prevent and remove the epidemic of cardiovascular disease and cancer, and why don't we just add COVID-19 to the respiratory diseases? Let's put all of them together. The lower respiratory infections, respiratory diseases, COVID-19 falls right into that. Flu, pneumonia. That's all it is. Elimination of mucus. People all of a sudden, like Brother Aaron was saying, people are thinking this is new. They're like, oh wow, there's mucus constipation, the fluid in the lungs. It's they're talking about mucus. What do you think we've been talking about? What was Arnold Ehret talking about in a book that he wrote in 1920? There's nothing new here. It's what we've always been talking about. When the body is overcome with waste and a lymphatic system that doesn't function, kidneys that are weak, no kind of filtration of all of this toxic poison you're putting in the body, there is only one result. So all of these causes of death, from cardiovascular disease to cancer to respiratory disease to even the endocrine things, all of this has its source in the eating of pus and mucus forming foods and the constipation, cellular constipation, that is the result of eating these foods. People are drowning in their own mucus every day. Cardiovascular disease, drowning in mucus, suffocating in your own waste. Respiratory diseases, same thing. Suffocating in your own waste. Why not make a change? What do you have to lose? What do you have to lose to try out fruits and green leafy vegetables, plant-based eating? What do you have to lose? Because there's not a list of, people aren't, the number one thing that people die from is not lack of protein or people are dying of drowning in their own waste. 50,000 people a day, cardiovascular disease. 24,000 people a day, cancers. 10,000 people a day, respiratory diseases. And like I said, we should combine lower respiratory with just as respiratory disease, and you get 16,000 people a day dying of respiratory diseases and infections. Why don't we add the COVID to that? Let's round it up to 1,000 people a day that start dying of COVID. We're still only at 16,806 people a day that would be dying from respiratory related disease or infection. What if we could go up to 10,000 people a day dying from COVID? If you believe that it even exists, then that's a whole other discussion. And I've talked about that already, all the sort of virus theories and given my opinion on that. And Brother Air's given his opinion. We're a little different in the way that we view the whole virus thing, but we ultimately get to the same result and location and agree on the ending, which is people are dying in their through suffocating in their own waste. When you have the buildup of mucus that is affecting the lungs like that, it's guaranteed you got a filthy colon. It's guaranteed that you have 32 feet of impacted intestines with feces all up in your stomach? How do you expect to remove waste and breathe freely when you got 10 to 15 to 20 pounds of feces in your stomach, continually just poisoning your whole body, creating an acidic environment from head to toe? So even if 10,000 people a day died of COVID-19 and over 9,000 died of respiratory diseases, 6,000, over 6,000, 6.5 thousand of lower respiratory infections, if you put all of those numbers together, you get 26,218 people dying every day of respiratory diseases and or infection. You are still under the 50,000 people that die every day of cardiovascular disease. So what I'm saying here, ladies and gentlemen, is these numbers aren't adding up. People aren't breaking these things down in a way that makes sense. They're speaking in a way that elicits fear, that sows fear. Oftentimes, when I've been listening to different news broadcasts, they lead with the large number of people that have been diagnosed with COVID-19. They say 1 million people have been diagnosed that have open cases of COVID-19. Then it's like, well, how many people have died of it? Well, that number's not as large.
The coronavirus pandemic continues its relentless expansion in almost every corner of the globe, with the number of confirmed COVID-19 cases worldwide rapidly approaching 1 million people, though the true number is certain to be far higher due to a critical lack of testing. The largest number of confirmed cases is in the United States, where the coronavirus deaths have topped 5,000.
And so we got to understand these things, break it down. Because if it was this important, if this death and the epidemic of all that was really, really as important as they are claiming it to be, then every day on the news, they would say something like, over 82,000 people died today of cardiovascular disease, cancer, and respiratory disease combined. If you combine those numbers, the three of those, that's how many people that would be. Well, actually more than that, because if you add in the lower respiratory infection to that, they say, okay, about 90,000 people died of cardiovascular disease, cancer, respiratory disease combined today. But they don't lead news like that. They're not telling you how many people are dying of those things. The whole broadcast, they're talking about how many cases of COVID-19 are there, coronavirus, how many people are suffering from the symptoms, all these kinds of things. And we're saying that this has always been part of the discussion for us. It doesn't matter what the name is. Doesn't matter if it's cardiovascular disease, respiratory disease, coronavirus, SARS, swine flu. Doesn't matter what the name is, because it's all about pus and mucus poisoning and drowning in your own waste. And that is why it is imperative and time is of the essence to get into and practice the Mucusless Diet Healing System on the highest level that you can. It is more important now than ever to do that. And so with that, ladies and gentlemen, I thank you so much for tuning in. As always, it is a distinct pleasure to be able to have these kinds of conversations with you about the Mucusless Diet Healing System, works of Professor Arnold Ehret, living a mucus-free lifestyle, elevating our spirit, cleaning up the spirit. You know, the word spirit, Spira, Spiro, meaning air. We got to clean ourselves up so that we don't have this bad breath. Bad breath is killing everybody. Folks with the cardiovascular disease, the 50,000 people that die every day of cardiovascular disease, you can ensure that they have bad breath. the 25,000 people that die of cancer every day, you can ensure that they have bad breath. And the 16,000 people that die of respiratory disease and infections a day, you can rest assured that they have bad breath. Let's clean up our breath. Let's clean up our Spira or Spira. Let's clean it up. Let's clean it up. So until next time, brothers and sisters, this is Professor Spira signing off. Peace, love, and breath.